Gananoque is a small town on the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, Canada. It is located in the area known as the Thousand Islands. Many people, both Canadians and Americans, live on inhabited islands in this region. Some of these islands are as good as the islands in the Caribbean or the South Pacific, as some of them have real castles. In terms of price-quality ratio, the Thousand Islands can compete with any other islands in the world, only they are located on the St. Lawrence River and not in the tropics. The most popular story associated with the Thousand Islands concerns the salad dressing of the same name. It is said that a housewife from this region invented this sauce. Later, he came to the owner of a famous hotel in New York, who included it in the menu of his establishment back in 1890. However, there is no written evidence to support this story. I was a truck driver. We have delivered to 48 contiguous states and Canada. I worked for a medium-sized company. We had about 100 trucks. All drivers were given the opportunity to choose between long-haul, regional, or local transport. Every time one of us went on a long-haul flight for a week or longer, we had a choice: stay home for a week and work local routes to spend time with family, or go back on long-haul flights. Sometimes we were allowed to take our wives with us on the flight. Most trucking companies operating across the country and in Canada keep their drivers on the road for weeks at a time. There are several professions that have a negative impact on the family. Military service is perhaps the most difficult in this regard, followed by long-distance duty and law enforcement work. I worked in construction during the summers while I was in school, so when I started working full-time after graduation, it was a logical step. By the age of 23, I was already a good carpenter. At 19, I met an office worker at a commercial bakery. Her name was Julie Simpson. My name is Scott Mann. Julie and I got married when we were 21. We were happy until the banking system and then the construction industry suffered significant losses. Julie and I discussed the situation and decided that I should try being a truck driver. Drivers earned good money, but the biggest disadvantage was the need to spend a lot of time away from home. The company I worked for advertised that they would pay for truck driving school if the driver worked for them for a year after getting his license. Julie and I talked it over and decided to give it a try. I was accepted and started my studies. 3 weeks later, I had my CDL Class A license. The next week, I was put in a truck with a driving instructor. He was an experienced driver who taught people like me the real work of the road. Driving a tractor with an empty trailer is one thing, but it's another thing entirely when the tractor has a loaded trailer attached and the weight increases from 35,000 pounds to 80,000. I had to spend 5 weeks with an instructor, but he convinced the security department that I was ready to work independently in just 4 weeks. I went on long-haul routes for a week, then worked on local routes for a week. It was convenient. We agreed that Julie would come to the office on Fridays to collect my paycheck. It was also convenient. We could have arranged a direct deposit, but Julie liked to get the check herself. I had been with the company for about 9 months and was just finishing up a week on local routes. My dispatcher, Shirley, called me and offered me a great deal. We had to send the cargo to Vancouver, Canada, and the return flight to Montreal. But in fact, the cargo was not to Montreal, but to Gananoque. The owner of the company recently purchased one of the thousands of islands. He was surprisingly young for the owner of a transport company. He was barely 6 or 7 years older than me. On the island, Shirley said, there were 2 houses, the main house and the guest house. The owner and his wife wanted to furnish the main house with handcrafted furniture from Vancouver Island. The guest house was already furnished. My job, if I accepted, was to deliver the cargo to Vancouver and then bring back the furniture for the boss. The furniture was supposed to be ready in a month, but it will be ready sooner, so the company's operations department decided to surprise the boss and deliver it early. There's one condition: you can't tell anyone, not even your wife. I'm not saying she'll tell, but she comes by to pick up your checks and might say something to the wrong person. The boss and his wife will be there next weekend. That's about the time you'll get there, if you can get to Vancouver, and they can load you up for the return trip. Sounds like something you'd be interested in? Before I could answer, she added, "Remember, if you agree, you can't say anything to anyone. Promise?" "I agree and promise not to tell anyone." "Okay, okay. Since you agreed and since I like you, did you see that new Peterbilt in the parking lot?" "Of course I did. Now it's yours. Move your gear into it. The load you're carrying is on trailer 2353. You can leave in the morning. Call me when you get to Vancouver and be careful." I came home and told Julie I had a flight to the West Coast. She didn't mind because the money was good, but we were both not happy that I would have to be away for almost 2 weeks. To compensate for this, we tried to spend as much time as we could in bed. Sex with Julie was always special. Right after I started driving, we took some candid photos of her so I could take them with me in the truck. I've already driven my truck to Canada 4 times. Every time he was examined, and I mean thoroughly examined. The only place that wasn't inspected the first time I crossed the border was the pocket hanging on my seat where her photographs were kept. After that, I left photos at home if I knew I was going to Canada. The next time, the border guards checked everything, including the pocket and even the mattress in the sleeping compartment. This time, I also left the photos at home. The road there was easy. Crossing the border went as usual. The Canadian officers, as always, were polite, but checked everything carefully. I called Shirley. She said the boss's furniture was ready to be loaded. She had been transported from the island the day before in anticipation of my arrival. When I got to the client, the unloading took only an hour, and it took me another hour to get to the loading location. Loading took much longer, since each part was packaged and secured individually. My truck was fully loaded, and I headed back east. I crossed the border in Detroit. It was about 9 hours from Detroit to Montreal. I drove to Kingston, parked for the night, and called Shirley. She said that the boss was already on the island, and the furniture barge was ready. I was supposed to pull up to the commercial cargo dock in the morning as soon as I could, and they would start unloading the furniture. I was there at 6 in the morning, and by 10 the barge was loaded. The journey to the island took about 45 minutes. It wasn't far in a straight line, but the barge was moving slowly. I went to the guest house to surprise the boss. The island was covered in trees, and I only knew the way to the apartment complex because of the path. The guest house had a small patio adjacent to it. Not far from the guest house was the main house. It looked huge. I saw the boss on the patio of the guest house. He was with some woman. They kissed. He assumed that this woman was his wife. As I got closer, I realized it was mine. She was completely naked. I walked up to them and coughed. They both shuddered and turned to me. It took a few seconds before they realized they had been caught. He didn't know me, but she did. I looked at him and said, "The furniture is already being delivered from the pier." Then he turned to his wife. "You should think about getting dressed before they get here." I turned around and walked back to the pier. I didn't hear a single word from either of them. On the way, I passed by workers who were carrying the first batch of furniture. Having reached the pier, I suddenly realized that I was on a damn island. I looked around and saw 4 boats tied up. I had heard that the island came with boats, so I assumed they all belonged to him. I had never driven a boat before, but this was a game changer. I've watched enough movies and television to know that a boat has a throttle. You push forward, it goes forward. Pull back, it moves in the opposite direction. I also knew that the boats didn't have a brake pedal, but I figured I'd figure that out later. I looked into the smallest boat, but there was no key in the ignition. I found a board on the wall that had boat keys on it with rubber floats attached so they wouldn't sink if they fell into the water. I grabbed all the keys and jumped into the boat. The key that worked was the second one I tried. I threw the rest of the keys into the river, floats or no floats. The engine started immediately, but the boat was still tied down. I jumped out, untied the bow and stern, climbed back into the boat, and pulled the throttle back. The boat took off abruptly and quickly left the pier. Once I was a safe distance away, I slammed the throttle forward and was thrown back into the seat. The drive to town only took about 15 minutes. I approached the town dock too quickly and slightly damaged the boat when it hit the dock. The engine was still running when I jumped out. The condition of the boat caught everyone's attention as I grabbed my things from the truck and headed into town. I looked back and saw a boat drifting down the river with the engine running, but without a person on board. The taxi took me to the city of Kingston and its airport quite quickly. The first flight was leaving in less than an hour, and it was a flight to New York. I bought a ticket. My phone kept ringing, and I saw it was Julie. She left one message: "Please call me." I called Shirley. "Good morning, Scott. Have you arrived yet? How long ago, Shirley?" "What? How long ago?" "How long has he been sleeping with my wife?" "What are you talking about?" "Oh, God. Is she there?" "She's there, that's for sure." "How long has this been going on?" "About 3 months." "Sorry, Scott. The boss's wife had to be on the island, otherwise I would never have sent you." "So you would send me away knowing that the boss was sleeping with my wife? Who else knows about this, Shirley?" "Just me and Joey." "Thank you, Shirley. Thank you very much." "Wait, where are you? What are you going to do?" "Wait, he's on the other line. I'll be right back." "Fuck you." Now I understood why she didn't want me to tell Julie about the trip. She would have told Bradley about this, and there would have been no surprise, especially the one that just happened. The airport was small, and I saw all the passengers coming and going. I kept looking around, expecting that either she or he was about to appear, but this did not happen. The flight went quickly. We landed, I rented a car, and 4 hours later I was home. She wasn't there. The entire way home, I never stopped thinking for a minute about what I should do next. My phone rang again, and Julie left another message. "Scott, if you're home, I'm on my way. Please don't do anything until we talk. We've never had sex, Scott. We just played a little. Please believe me." Damn it. Did she actually think I was stupid enough to believe that? Really? When I arrived at our apartment, I loaded my pickup with everything I wanted to pick up and drove to the office. I calmly walked into the operations department. Shirley and Joey were there. When they saw me, none of them could meet my gaze. "How much money do you owe me, Shirley?" "Scott, write me a check for everything the company owes me. Now." "I'm sorry, Scott. Mr. Bradley said not to give you anything until he talks to you." "Shirley, you owe me a lot. He said you damaged one of his boats." "What else did he say? Bragged about having sex with my wife behind my back? Were you all laughing at me here? Did Julie come here and tell you to keep me on the road as long as possible so she could sleep with Bradley? Write me a check, Shirley, and I won't destroy this office to hell." It took her a few minutes to figure out how much I was owed, and she called the accounting department to write them a check. I left and headed to the accounting department. The check was ready. I looked at him. "I changed my mind. Transfer the money to my account." "But Scott." "Direct transfer. Now, please." I gave them my details, and they did it. Bradley will not be able to cancel the direct transfer. Then I drove to Bradley's house. We were there once for a picnic. My wife was probably there for more than just the picnics. Mrs. Bradley opened the door. She looked and acted like she was unwell. "How can I help?" she asked. "My name is Scott Mann, and I used to work for your husband. This morning I delivered furniture to your island and discovered that your husband and my wife are lovers. I just thought you should know. Have a nice day." "Wait, mister, what did you say your name was?" "Mann. Scott Mann." "What's your wife's name?" "Julie Mann." "Did you see this morning?" "With my own eyes." "Are you sure?" "Damn it, madam. Of course I'm sure. Do you think I would come up with such a story about my own wife?" I headed to my pickup truck and drove off, not having any idea where I was going, so I drove to my parents. It didn't take long to get to them. Mom, as always, offered me a cup of coffee. I took it and soon stretched out on the sofa. I closed my eyes. The next thing I heard was my father's voice. "Julie, get off my porch or I'll call the police. But I need to talk to Scott." "After what you did to him?" asked the father. "No way." but he doesn't understand. Oh, I think he understands everything perfectly. You cheated on him with his boss for 3 months. What's so difficult about that? But he doesn't know why. Of course he does. You're a cheater, that's all. Now get off my porch. She started screaming my name. Scott, talk to me, please. Scott, give me a chance to explain. Scott, Scott. It was a long day, and I soon fell asleep again. Early in the morning, I woke up and went to my pickup truck. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to go somewhere. I opened the door to sit down and saw Julie sleeping on the seat. She sat up when she heard me open the door. I was about to leave, but she grabbed my hand and pulled me back. Please, Scott, listen to me. I had no choice. You don't need to hang noodles on my ears, unless you were forcibly held. Is that so, Julie? Are you being held forcibly? Or did they add something? No, that's not the point. So you slept with him of your own free will. It was a statement, not a question. Scott, just give me a chance to explain everything. I repeat, you slept with him of your own free will. Okay, I slept with him, but... Besides, you lied. We never had sex. We were just playing a little. God, did you really expect me to believe this? Get out of my truck. She didn't move, so I grabbed her hand and pushed her out. I got into the truck and drove away before she had time to get up from the ground. I went to a local diner for breakfast. I ordered one of the dishes and went to the toilet while I waited. After picking up the food, I sat down at a table and ate. When I finished, I went to the bank and divided our money. My phone kept ringing and several people left me messages. Among them were 2 messages from my former employer, Ernest T. Bradley. First message: call me and let's talk, or I'll sue you for damaging my boat, and you'll go to jail for threatening my employees. And don't think that I won't do it. In a second message, he stated, listen, I slept with your wife. Deal with it. This happens every day. She's not the first wife I've slept with, and she won't be the last. Swallow your pride, take it back. This is what she likes and what she wants, so give it to her. If you don't, maybe I'll continue doing this. Now get back here and deliver my truck back, or I'll claim you stole it. Besides, you owe me 3 more months of work to pay for your driving school. God, what a bastard he was. So he was still in Canada. I called his wife to see if I could meet her instead of breaking into their house like last time. She agreed, and I let her listen to his messages. She looked even worse than before when she heard them. At first, I wasn't sure if I believed you, but now I definitely do. I'll give him a hot life. Can I have a copy of this message? We made a copy for her. What are you going to do with your wife? She asked. Divorce, of course. I just don't know where to start. It's simple, she said. Find a good lawyer and trust him. It seemed so simple. I left her and returned to my parents. They also asked what I was going to do. I told them the same thing I told Mrs. Bradley. Father in turn told me word for word what Mrs. Bradley said. I was convinced, so I started looking for a lawyer. Again, I didn't know where to start, so I started with last names starting with A in the phone book. Got to D before I found the right person. David Dennison, and I hit it off immediately. All his relatives were truck drivers, and so was he, until he got into an accident and was left paralyzed from the waist down. He then graduated from law school in a wheelchair. He was the only member of his family who was not in the trucking business, but they all knew and respected Ernest T. Bradley. Dennison has commented several times about Bradley's youth and business acumen. In fact, everyone who knew him respected him. He was an important figure in the community, sponsoring sports teams and arts programs and donating to charities. When I told Dennison what I had discovered in Canada, he initially refused to believe me. He was on Bradley's side, and I was almost ready to leave and find another lawyer, but I decided to let him listen to the messages. He finally started to believe. Wow, if this gets out, it will blow up our community. How do you want to handle this? As confidential as possible, or do you want to attract public attention? All I want is a divorce for minimal money. This should never make the papers, but the reason for divorce would be adultery. If this means that rumors will spread throughout the city, so be it, but no psychological violence or irreconcilable differences. She cheated, and it needs to be recorded. It can be difficult if this is the only message we have. Now the courts almost require visual evidence, especially when it comes to a person of his status. Well, let's try. Fine. We will serve her with a summons in the coming days. Do you know where she will be? Either at work at the bakery, or at home, or in Canada with him, I guess. Well, we definitely won't be able to find it in Canada, so we'll try it at home or at work. I'm fine with that. You can contact me on my cell phone or at your parents'. I was tired of living with my parents, so over the next few days, I started looking for an apartment. I found one, not the most luxurious or the best in the city, but it was mine. A week later, Julie was given a summons at work. My father had a small welding shop. I had never shown any interest or talent for welding before, but that started to change. My father convinced me to go to work with him so that I would spend less time in my new apartment. Both of them, father and mother, thought that I had been locked up too long. I thought about getting a job at another transport company, but I wasn't enthusiastic about it, or about anything else, so I went to work in a welding shop. My dad had a pickup truck with portable welding equipment and mostly did repair work. Sometimes a client would ask for something to be specially ordered, and my father would make it. Julie tried to talk to me several times, but after she was served with a subpoena, all issues were resolved through our lawyers. Our first meeting took place about a month after the documents were presented to her. Her lawyer, of course, tried to exclude infidelity from the case. I categorically refused. Bradley was named in the divorce petition, and Julie desperately did not want his name to appear in the divorce case for adultery. This could ruin his reputation in the community. He doesn't deserve this, she argued. I exploded. Are you serious? He steals wives and society needs to know about it. Julie chimed in. If you had treated your wife better, they wouldn't have been able to steal her. This caused an argument between us, which could only be stopped by separating us into different rooms. When we cooled down and were back in the same room, she again tried to convince me to remove his name from the case. I'm not going to do it, so forget it. Why are you defending him so hard? Are you going to marry him? Are you still sleeping with him? FYI, we're still dating, so yes, I'm still sleeping with him. Her lawyer simply laid his head down on the table and groaned without raising his head. You just admitted to your husband and two representatives of the court that you committed adultery. It's probably the worst thing you could do. I don't care at this point, she replied. Then she turned to me. And in answer to your other question, yes, I'm going to marry him, as soon as he gets divorced. Do you think he loves you? I asked. Certainly. I put the phone on the table and played her message to me. That's not what he meant. He just wanted to piss you off, she said. I laughed as Mr. Dennison took an envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Julie. Her lawyer intercepted the envelope, opened it, and began looking through the contents. He read the note attached to the photos and then began flipping through them one by one. Then he handed them to Julie. She flipped through the photos and then read the note. Mr. Mann, this may help you in your divorce. The first 5 pictures were taken on the island 3 weeks ago. The woman in them is his hairdresser's wife. She left her husband to spend the weekend with mine. The following 6 pictures were taken at our home last week. I was with my parents in another city. This woman is someone he picked up at a bar. I don't know if she's married, and I don't care. I don't know her name, and my husband probably doesn't know either. She's just another mistress, just like your wife. The note was signed by Cynthia. All of the photographs showed Bradley and these women in various stages of nudity or sexual poses. There was no doubt that they had sex. Julie returned the photographs to the table, stood up, and left the room. I didn't see her again until the trial. We shared everything. She got half of our money, her jewelry, dishes, silver, and clothes. She stayed in our apartment. Bradley's fall from his pedestal in society was rapid. His reputation was destroyed, and the 3 sports teams he sponsored folded. Cynthia received half of all his assets, which meant she owned half of the trucking company and their home. He only got an island in Canada because she didn't want to take it. He sent me a bill for driving school, blaming me for quitting before fulfilling the terms of our contract. Mr. Dennison immediately sent him a letter telling him to kiss our asses. Cynthia called me to tell me to ignore the letter and also offered me a job as an operations manager for a shipping company. I thought about it for a while, but ultimately decided against it. Over the next year, I discovered that if I tried, I could weld a pretty neat weld, thanks to my father's patience and teaching skills. I also realized that I enjoy doing this. I started dating women, but serious and long-term relationships did not begin. However, I rarely had to suffer from a lack of sex, since there were always enough women around who were ready for relationships. Sometimes I would see Julie, and we would always nod politely to each other. Bradley's moving business was sold, and I never saw Cynthia again. Sometimes I met Bradley himself. I knew him, but he would hardly recognize me. When I worked for him, I was one of hundreds of drivers, and he saw us very rarely. While I was learning to weld, I realized that I liked working with metal. In addition to making repairs in the shop and fixing equipment on site with a pickup truck, I began making small items such as weather vanes, custom gate hinges, and mailbox stands. My father and I rarely worked on weekends, but one Sunday I found myself working on a rather elaborate weather vane. I was having trouble with its proportions, so I just stared at it, hoping the solution would come naturally. I didn't hear the door open or close, but I felt someone's presence, so I raised my head. It was Julie. We were both silent. She stood there for a few minutes before she pulled up a metal stool and sat down. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I have nothing to say." "Fine. Then just listen." She leaned forward. "I don't have a good explanation for what I did. You and I had a good life. We had enough money, a good apartment. We loved each other. At least I think they did. So why did I suddenly decide to sleep with Bradley? The answer is simple, but at the same time complex. I could try to blame you and say that you were away too much, because that's one of the things he told me, and after a while I started to believe it. He also said that you treat me badly when you are at home, and after some time I began to believe that too. He said that almost every truck driver finds someone on the highway to sleep with, and after a while I began to imagine how you have sex with some waitress at the bus stop or with a female driver. He also said that truck drivers never make enough to provide for their women, and I ended up believing that too. He was, and probably still is, a smooth-talking bastard, and I was as naive as he was convincing. This didn't happen overnight. He worked on me for months. Then Shirley began to influence me, saying that Bradley could take great care of me if I gave him a chance. She said that she would be able to control your trips, and I would never have to be afraid that you would find out about everything. She also said that Mrs. Bradley told her that she did not need sex as often as her husband did, and therefore allowed him to sleep with certain women because it made him a better husband for her. She said that Mrs. Bradley must have approved of the women he slept with, and that she approved of me just by seeing me come for your checks. Now these false words seem funny to me, but then it was not so. Now I understand it. I sat listening to her. When I thought she was done, I spoke up. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Don't know. I didn't think I would ever dare to tell you the truth. I didn't want you to know how stupid I was. I always thought I'd make up a story that would make everything your fault, and I had a lot of those, but I couldn't tell you any of them. Today, driving past your workshop, I saw you here and decided to stop. I didn't know what I was going to say, only that I had to say something if you would let me, but what I said was the truth." "What did you expect from this?" "Just so you know that you are not to blame for anything, that it was my selfish desires and imaginary situations that he imposed on me. I also wanted you to know that, believe it or not, I never stopped loving you." "That's where I think you're lying. I don't think you can truly love someone and still lie to them or cheat on them. You did both. You even wanted to marry him, if I remember correctly. Are you still sleeping with him? I can't explain it any better than I already have, and I can't make you believe it, so I won't even try. And no, I don't see him anymore. Ever since we met in the lawyer's office and I saw those photos, I broke up with him." She sat there for a few more minutes, watching me work. "I guess it's time for me to go." She stood up. "Scott," I looked at her, "is there any chance that you will forgive me and give me another chance?" I shook my head. When I saw everything with my own eyes, it was all over. You know where the exit is. After she left, I did almost nothing except reaffirm my opinion that my former boss was a first-class scumbag and my ex-wife was stupider than a traffic jam. I wondered what would have happened if I had not gone to that island to surprise my boss. Would I continue to work as a driver and get leftovers? I came to the conclusion that I was much happier making weather vanes, even though I was poor. One day, we received a flyer in the mail advertising the Renaissance Festival. I've never heard of such festivals. The flyer featured photos of people fighting in tournaments and armored knights walking around the grounds. There were also photos of vendors selling armor, swords, knives, costumes, and everything related to the Renaissance. The festival was going to be just down the road from us in Maryland, and I learned from this flyer that Maryland has two official sports, jousting and lacrosse. I couldn't believe that jousting was an official sport of any state, so I checked and found out it was true. I decided to go to the festival. I spent the whole day there, looking at the sellers' wares and watching the visitors. There was a lot of money at the festival site, and I realized that I could earn my own. At the festival, there were several sellers of swords and knives, as well as blacksmiths making armor. I liked the knights' armor and shields. I returned home, did a lot of research, and developed my first shield and sword. I also found the schedule of Renaissance festivals on the internet. I made 5 shields and 7 swords and went to the nearest festival I found. I arrived the day before it started to talk to the sellers. I met one seller whose swords and knives seemed to me to be of the highest quality. I offered him a deal, leave my goods for sale to him, and he would receive a percentage of the sales. He hesitated, but agreed. I was planning to stay the night, but there were no rooms available nearby, a sign of how popular these festivals are, so I went home. I rarely trust strangers, but there was no other way for me to sell the products myself. The seller, Teddy Wickoff, called me on Sunday morning to let me know that all my items had been sold. He said he would send me a check. I have a new business. I spent the following weeks creating new festival merchandise. Teddy ordered 10 swords and 10 shields for the next festival, which was in a week. I only managed to make 4 of each. At the same time, I was still helping my father in his workshop. We received a call asking us to repair the entrance gate. It turned out that my daughter's boyfriend crashed into them instead of waiting for them to open. I was told that alcohol was involved. I went there and saw that the gate was huge, almost 10 feet high. The house outside the gate was also huge. I met the owner, Mr. James Jameson. At first, I was going to turn down the job because I thought it was too big for us. But then I decided to try. All we would have lost was some time and metal if I hadn't pulled it off. I spent most of the day trying to figure out what tools I would need, and then went back to the workshop to check what we had available. I found a couple of winches that I thought might work, and returned to the site the next day. I had worked for about 2 hours and was starting to make progress when a woman about my age brought me iced tea. Her name was Hannah, and she lived in this house. It was her boyfriend who damaged the gate. I had my own drinks, but she came twice with tea and stayed to talk each time. It took 2 days to bend, twist, straighten, and weld the gate into place. Hannah was there on the second day with drinks and a good sense of humor. I enjoyed her company. Around the same time, I began to become interested in knightly armor. They were popular at festivals, and I was curious to know how they were made, how long it took, how much it cost to make such armor, and finally, whether it was possible to make money from it. I was dating a woman I met in the library while I was doing research. We met at least twice a week and had sex every time we saw each other. However, this relationship, like the previous ones, soon fizzled out. There was a cinema in the shopping center. I rarely went to the movies, But one Friday night, I was so bored that I decided to go. When the lights in the hall went out, I saw Hannah come in with a guy. They sat down right in front of me, and his arm immediately wrapped around her. Less than 5 minutes had passed since the trailers started showing when I heard Hannah's voice. "If you touch me there again, I will kill you." His hand immediately withdrew from her shoulder. She rushed out of the hall in irritation, and her boyfriend followed, trying to persuade her to return. I followed them out. To Hannah's credit, she didn't put up with any nonsense from him. I was too far away to hear their conversation, but they were clearly figuring out something. I decided to intervene. It was something new for me. "Sorry, Hannah. Are you okay?" I asked. She looked at me. It took a few seconds to recognize me. "No, it's not okay. This guy looks like an octopus, and I'm tired of pushing him away. Could you take me home?" "No problem." We walked to my pickup truck when suddenly another guy approached us. "Hannah, is everything okay?" he asked. "Now, yes," she replied. "Do you want me to take you home?" he asked. She didn't even look at me before answering yes. They walked to his car without saying a word to me, as if I didn't exist. I stood looking after them. Shaking my head, I returned home. A few days later, I found myself at her house again. The handrails along the walkway between the house and the pool were in need of repair, so Mr. Jameson called me in again. Hannah saw me and came over to say hello, but didn't mention anything about the situation in the movie theater. I was a little annoyed at how I had been completely ignored that evening and wasn't in the mood to talk. She took the hint and left. The next day I returned with new parts. The handrails were standard and parts were easy to find. She approached me again on the way to the pool to chat. I mostly ignored her. I enjoyed our conversations when I was working on the gate, but ever since the incident at the movie theater, I've been in a completely different mood. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. "Do you remember last week at the movies?" I asked. "You mean when I was with that guy who was hitting on me?" she clarified. "Yes. So what?" "You asked me to take you home. Do you remember this?" "Certainly." "What happened next?" "Well, then Jimmy came over and offered me a ride home." "And you don't see anything strange in this?" "No. What's wrong?" "If you don't see, then there's nothing to talk about," I said, and, taking a hammer, began to knock on the metal, trying not to give her any more chances to continue the conversation. "This doesn't make any sense." She was clearly losing patience. "For you, maybe not," I continued to work, without looking up at her. She looked at me for a few seconds and then asked, "You're mad at me, right?" "The problem is, you don't even understand why," I replied, hitting the metal with the hammer again to let her know the conversation was over. She left, and I finished working on the handrails. My fascination with knightly armor intensified, and I continued my research. I finally put together my first set of armor and was pretty proud of myself. I sent a photo of the armor to Teddy to get his opinion. "Hold on to your shields and swords," he said with a smile. "You're good at this, but the armor needs some work before anyone will buy it." A few days later, I was at a local bar, drinking beer and watching baseball, when Hannah sat down with me. "I meet friends for drinks. Would you like to join?" she asked. "No, thank you. I feel good here too," I answered. She stood up and took a step away, but stopped, looked back at me and asked, "Will you ever explain to me what I did wrong to make you so angry?" "If I have to explain, that's the whole problem," I said. "Have a nice evening." I had almost finished my beer and was about to leave when Hannah approached me again. "Oh God, Scott, I'm sorry. I didn't want to ignore you in the movie. That guy made me so angry that I didn't even realize what I was doing. Please accept my apologies." She seemed to realize her mistake. Perhaps one of her friends helped her understand. I smiled. "Apology accepted." She smiled back. "Will you join us now?" She hesitated a little. "Please, at least for one drink. I owe you at least this." I smiled again. "Fine, thank you." We went to her table, and the evening turned out to be quite pleasant. A couple of her friends made fun of her several times during the evening for her behavior in the movies. By the end of the evening, I even felt a little sorry for her. The group broke up, and we all started to go our separate ways. I went out with Ginny. I sat next to her at the table. I asked her about Hannah, and she said they had been friends for a long time. Listen, Scott, I'm not her best friend, but we're close. She likes something about you. She apologized for the way she acted. She said it to me, to everyone at the table, and to you too. You have to admit it. Call her. Do you have her number? No. Give me your phone. I handed it over, and she put in Hannah's number. Call her. The next week, I was working in the workshop when Hannah came by. I assumed she got the address from her father. Did you enjoy it that evening? She asked. Yes, I like your friends. That's good, but what about me? What about you? I like you. I apologized, if you remember. I remember. Then why aren't we friends? She asked. I smiled. I think we're working on it. An apology does not automatically mean friendship. It simply means that you realize you made a mistake and you regret what you did, so you apologize. The person can accept the apology or not. I accepted it, but that doesn't mean we'll immediately become best friends. It just means I accept that you realized what you did and are sorry for it, as long as the apology was sincere. It was sincere. I agree. Fine. Then let's go to dinner. I laughed. Why not? She asked. This will be a good way to develop our friendship. Fine. When? Why not tonight? And so it happened. Hannah and I had dinner and our friendship began to grow. We dated for 2 months before I saw her naked, but that was just the beginning. Our relationship developed, and soon we wanted to spend all our time together. She would come to the studio just to sit next to me, and we would both enjoy that time together. I could work and she could read. We didn't need to talk or interact, just being near each other was enough. One evening, during pillow talk, she revealed that she had only been married for a short time. But she shocked me when she said that Jonah Jameson was not her real father. He and her mother were married for only 7 years. She had an older brother and their father died. 2 years later, her mother married Jameson. Their father owned a transport company, and her brother, Ernest, wanted to take control of it. He was 6 years older than Hannah, and most people thought he was too young for it. But Hannah and her mother decided to give him a chance. He had real talent, and the company flourished. I got out of bed, got us both a drink, and went back to bed. Tell me about your brother, I said. I have already told you the most important thing. In fact, the shipping company continued to thrive, so much so that he and my ex-sister-in-law bought an island in Canada. But then some bitch got hold of him, and he got divorced and sold the company. Apparently, this bitch's husband started working for him, and they decided to make money off my poor brother. His wife infiltrated his circle and seduced him. They arranged everything so that their husband caught them together on the island. My sister-in-law divorced her brother, took half of the company, and they were forced to sell it. These are a couple of damn scammers. I finished my drink in one gulp. How much did they get out of him? I asked. My brother didn't tell me, but they definitely got something. Do you remember their names? I remembered, but no longer. I decided to tell her what really happened, but I assumed it would end our relationship, so I decided to enjoy her one more time. After we calmed down, I almost changed my mind about telling her who I really was because it was the best sex I've ever had. I knew that as soon as I told the truth, everything would end. We were at her house, and I was about to leave anyway, so I started getting dressed. I sat on the edge of her bed, putting on my socks and boots. The time came, and I began. Let's go back to the story of your brother's divorce. Is what you told me the official version or his version? He told me this, so this is the official version. Why are you asking? Because that's not how it happened. What do you mean? And I told her the real story. About halfway through, she jumped out of bed, still naked, and just stared at me. I ended up saying that all Julie and I got out of this was a scam, not money. When I finished, she only said, "You're lying. Leave." I'm not lying. This is true. She threw a pillow at me. You're lying. Go away and don't come back." With these words, I left. I was sorry it ended like that, but I was happy with the last sex. Life moved on. I again entered a period without a relationship, and I could not get out of this state. One evening, I decided to treat myself and have dinner at a very nice restaurant. I finished my dish, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and looked around. A few tables further away from me sat Hannah and her brother. On their table was a small cake with a few candles. I signaled to the waiter that I was ready to receive the bill. He brought it and I paid. I then walked straight to Hannah's desk and sat down. They both looked at me like I was an alien. Her brother spoke first. "Are you sure you're at the right table?" he asked, clearly not recognizing me. "Quite, and I think you should tell your sister the truth about your divorce. She knows about it. Who the hell are you? But obviously she doesn't know the truth, so you need to tell her the real version. Fuck you." "Scott, what are you doing?" Hannah almost screamed. "Get out of here," Hannah almost screamed. The waiter immediately appeared next to our table. "Are there any problems here?" he asked. "This man," Hannah said, pointing at me, "sat at our table uninvited and threatened my brother. I want him out of here." "Certainly. Sir, I will have to ask you to leave the establishment," the waiter said. I looked at Bradley. "You're a real bastard." Then I turned to Hannah. "I don't know why you never talked to his ex-wife, but look at the court records of my divorce. Then you will know the truth." "Just get out of here," she said. I got up and left, assuming that this would be the last time I would see her. I continued to work in my workshop, developing new and interesting projects such as axes and chain mail. I was so busy that I almost didn't notice that I didn't see Hannah anymore. A festival was planned for the following weekend. I took some shields with me, as well as samples of axes and chainmail to show Teddy. He got me a vendor pass, so I went straight to the festival. When I arrived, he was talking to a young woman dressed in period costume. I stood and waited for them to finish talking. He noticed me, recognized me, and waved his hand, inviting me to come over. "Diana, this is Scott. Scott, this is Diana," he said, turning to me. "Scott is the designer and maker of some of our items, and I understand he has something new. Right, Scott?" I laughed. "Exactly." I pulled out a few new items from my van. They both looked at them as if they had treasures in front of them. I couldn't take my eyes off her dress. Every time she leaned forward, I leaned too, hoping to see more, but the corset was too tight to allow me a better view. I spent a lot of time with them, and we even had dinner together. Dinner included meat pies and iced tea from another vendor. I wanted to ask about their relationship, but there was never a right moment for this. There were many people walking around the area, renewing old acquaintances and establishing contacts with other festival participants. At least half of them were dressed in period costumes. Some men staged comic sword fights for entertainment. These fights were training for the public performance, which was to begin the next day. I don't remember when I saw so many people having so much fun. Teddy had a tent in the area reserved for vendors and reenactors, so I stayed with him for the night. When everything calmed down, I asked him about Diana. She and her sister are the organizers of this and many other festivals across the country. Everyone loves to see her. We have been friends with her for many years. If you weren't here today, she would have spent the night with me. Oh damn, why didn't you tell me? I would go to a motel. No, I wouldn't leave. Even if I let you go, there are no rooms available for 50 miles. When visitors started arriving the next day, the reenactors had even more fun interacting with them, and Diana, as I was constantly told, was a huge hit. I spent the whole weekend with Teddy. Several times I replaced him in the shop while he and Diana went to his tent. I had a lot of time to interact with other sellers and visitors. We sold everything Teddy had in stock, including what I brought with me. It was a profitable weekend, and I decided to participate in more festivals. The festival ended on Sunday. I helped Teddy dismantle his shop and pack everything. Home was 8 hours away, so he convinced me to stay another night. Their next festival was 18 hours away, and the tents were starting to be set up on Wednesday for the opening on Thursday. I wasn't sure I'd have time to make a new chain mail, but I told him I'd try. When I returned home, I immediately went to the workshop and started working. It was already late when I started yawning and realized that I was tired. I barely slept the entire weekend. When I left, the clock showed almost 2 in the morning. It was about 3 in the morning when I returned home. Not even 5 minutes had passed when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and Hannah literally fell into my arms. She smelled of alcohol. 2 policemen stood behind her. "Are you Scott, man?" "Yes, it's me." "Is she yours?" "I know her, but she doesn't belong to me." "Are you sure?" "She claims you are her boyfriend." "Not at all. The last time I saw her, she called me a liar and kicked me out of the house, so I promise you I'm not her boyfriend." Although this was not entirely true. The last time I saw her was in a restaurant, but that didn't matter to the police. "Okay, let's go, Tommy. Let's get her." Tommy must have been his partner because he walked over and took her hand. "Where are you taking her?" I asked. "She will spend the night in the sobering station." "No, don't do that. I'll take care of her." "Are you sure?" "No, but I can't let her spend the night in jail." I left her in her clothes and put her on the only bed I had my own. I had to sleep on the couch, which was better than the air mattress in Teddy's tent, but I would have preferred my own bed. Instead, a drunken woman slept in it, snoring. I was almost asleep when I heard the sounds of vomiting. I jumped up and ran to the bedroom. It was too late. She had already vomited on the floor. She looked up at me, then felt nauseous again and continued her work. It only took me a few seconds to decide what to do. I left the room and closed the door. I lay down on the sofa with a smile on my face and fell asleep. In the morning, I opened the door to the bedroom and almost fainted from the smell. There was no way I could shower, shave, and get dressed in this horrible-smelling room, so I went to work. I didn't hear anything from her all day and expected that when I returned home, I would find her still sleeping. I was wrong. She left, and the apartment was perfectly clean. There wasn't even a smell of vomit left. I immediately headed to the shower. I looked for a note or something like that, but didn't find anything. When I went to bed in the evening, I discovered that she had even changed the bed linen. I only had one set, so she had to wash it, probably at the same time as her clothes. I worked tirelessly, but never managed to finish the new chain mail. Teddy stopped by and picked up several shields, swords, and axes that I had put aside. We discussed the possibility of hiring a couple of people to help us, but we both realized that good metalworkers were not so easy to find. Then we decided to try to train them and advertised in a regular newspaper and in the festival mailing list. It was Friday evening, and I was in the workshop designing a machine that could make chainmail faster than I could. There were several machines like this on the market, but I thought I could do better. It was late, and I was tired when there was a knock on the door. A very sober Hannah stood on the threshold. "Thank you for saving me from jail," she said. I nodded. "I tried to clean up after myself. Everything is fine." I nodded again. We just stood there and looked at each other while she tried to find something to say. "Listen, I've had a long day and I need to sleep." I walked past her, closed and locked the door, then walked to the car. "Good night." I was almost getting into the car when I heard, "You were right. My brother lied. I'm sorry." I simply waved my hand over my shoulder, got into the car, and drove home. I was still fascinated by knightly armor. After Teddy criticized my first set of armor, I did a lot of research and made a second set, which I used as a template for the next ones. The work was labor-intensive, time-consuming, and very challenging, but I loved the challenge. I felt ready to unveil my new kit. I took it to the next festival, and Teddy was delighted. We could have sold it several times, but we wanted to use it as a sample of my work. People looked at it, made comments, and if they wanted to buy armor for themselves, we discussed what changes they would like to make to their order. My life at festivals was good and profitable. I bought a trailer that I used to carry tools and materials to work with while traveling from festival to festival. Sometimes I worked right on the spot, in front of the audience, and sometimes in the sales area. One evening, when there were no festivals, I was talking to my father and expressed surprise at how successful Renaissance metalwork could be. Who would have thought that so many people are interested in armor and can afford to buy it? These things weren't cheap. Festival season ended, and I started dating a girl I met at a local car dealership. I was thinking about buying a new truck. My dad had been using his old welding truck for a long time, and I decided it would make sense to give him my truck with the welding equipment installed and buy myself a new, larger one. That day, I was at a car dealership, looking at a new truck, and there I met her. She came to the salon to service her car, and striking up a conversation, we exchanged phone numbers. A week later, we had our first date, then our second, and so on. One evening, after another date, she invited me to her home. We were already sitting in her living room, and I was drinking a second glass of something alcoholic when she stood in front of me and began to unbutton her blouse. "Do you mind if I relax?" she asked. "I don't mind if I can enjoy the process too," I replied with a smile. She laughed quietly. "That's the point. I undress and you watch. Then it's your turn, and I'll watch you undress." "It sounds like you have everything thought of," I said. "Sure," she said, taking off her blouse, then slowly pulling off her skirt, which fell to the floor. "Just watch and enjoy. You like to watch a woman undress, right?" "I don't know, I've never done that before," I replied, and she laughed again, this time more deeply and hoarsely. "I hope you have better sex than you lie," she said, taking off her bra and tossing it over her skirt. I smiled. I left her home around 3 in the morning. All the time on the road, I mentally compared her with Hannah and our last sexual experience and could not decide who was better. This relationship lasted about 4 months before we decided to break up. The next day, I checked my phone and saw that I had missed several messages, 3 of which were from Hannah. They all started the same way. "Scott, please call me when you get this message. I don't care what time it is. Please." I decided to call her, despite the late hour. She answered after the second ring. "Hey, Scott," she said, and I could hear a hint of drink in her voice. "Did I wake you?" I asked. "No, I tried to stay awake so I could wait for your call." "Well, I called. What happened?" "I wanted you to know that my brother lied about his divorce. You were right, and I'm sorry." "You already apologized for this. Anything else?" "Yes." She paused. "Can we see each other again? I miss you." "Honestly, nothing can happen between us. Knowing who your brother is and that he slept with my wife. If we start dating again, we will inevitably run into him, and I will always feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to put myself through that test." I heard her start crying. "I knew you would say it, but I hoped you wouldn't. Goodbye, Scott." The Renaissance festivals were in full swing again. I filled out all my vendor passes, bought a tent and other camping gear, and hit the road. I helped Teddy in his shop most of the time, and when I wasn't doing that, I worked on creating new items to sell. My armor improved significantly during the break, and at every festival we sold at least one set. We could have sold more, but it took too long to make one set. 2 days after the end of one of the festivals, Teddy called and asked if I could work in his place at the next one. I agreed. He lived close to the venue, so he brought his trailer with the goods I would need. I loaded up my truck and left my own trailer at home, taking it. I worked at 3 festivals in a row and even made billboards in front of the audience. I also continued to work on the chainmail machine, and by the 3rd festival, I was able to demonstrate it in action. The next festival was to take place near Philadelphia and last 11 days. It was one of the largest festivals in the country. Typically, festivals ran from Thursday to Sunday, but this one started on Thursday and continued through the following weekend and into the week. I spent 2 weeks at home working on products for the festival, mostly armor. My father became an expert in shields, axes, and swords, and we both worked late into the night. Late at night, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and a very drunk Hannah fell into my arms again. "Is she yours?" asked one of the policemen. "If it helps her avoid a night in the sobering-up station, then yes," I replied. I carried her to the bed, and I slept on the sofa again. In the morning, I looked into the bedroom where Hannah was sleeping. She looked completely peaceful, as if she had not been ill the night before. I wondered if I should stay and try to talk to her or just let it all go. Deciding that now was not the time for serious conversations, I left for work. When I returned home in the evening, everything in the house was clean and tidy again, even the kitchen was tidy. In the bathroom, I noticed that my toothbrush and towel were out of place. It looked like she had put everything in perfect order before leaving. I sat on the couch, wondering if I should contact her again. The next day, I left for a festival near Philadelphia. I took with me everything I needed for the demonstration: materials for shields and chain mail. I planned to show my work to visitors, attracting attention. The first day went with a bang, and every next day was better. On Sunday, people crowded around my stand all day, watching me collect chain mail. And this was only the first weekend of two. After the festival closed in the evenings, the area for vendors and participants had its own special atmosphere. Life was in full swing everywhere. Someone was preparing food, someone was playing music, someone was rehearsing fencing, and someone was repairing costumes or discussing their goods. The atmosphere was like a holiday. I sat next to the tent and watched how everything was noisy around. At such moments, it was especially nice when there was someone nearby with whom you could just talk or hug, but I didn't have such a person. On Monday, when the festival was less crowded, I was again demonstrating how to make chainmail when I noticed Hannah in the crowd. She just stood and watched. I continued my demonstration as if I didn't see her, and as people began to leave, she came closer. "Do you like doing this?" she asked. "Yes, very much," I replied. "You're really good at this," she said and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't see her again until the end of the festival. My parents arrived in the middle of the week, bringing more shields and axes. I showed them my work and how the festival works. My mom wasn't happy with me living in a tent, but they were both impressed with what I was doing. The rest of the week and the following weekend went well. Teddy and I sold a lot of products and were happy with the results. When I returned home, I took a day off to rest. Returning to the workshop, I saw that my father was already working on a new chain mail for me. I told him about my plans to buy a motorhome and a new trailer for traveling to festivals. At that moment, Hannah came through the door. "The festival was simply amazing. My friends and I are going to the next one when it's closer to us," she said. "We're even thinking about wearing costumes." "I think it'll be fun," I replied without much enthusiasm. "Will you be there?" she asked. "Maybe." "Can I come with you?" she asked again. "It's not entirely convenient. I leave for the festival on Wednesday and stay there until Sunday." "So what? We can get a motel room." "Hotels sell out months before the festival." "Where do you live?" She did not let up. "In the tent." "Oh, that sounds fun. Maybe we could share a tent." Her voice was playful. "She's too small for two." "A little tent can be fun," she said with a wink. My father just grinned and walked away, leaving us alone. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "You will never forget that my brother slept with your wife, so there will never be a serious relationship between us. But that doesn't mean we can't be sex partners, right? We love doing this with each other, don't we?" I nodded. "So why not use this opportunity? You can date whoever you want, but if she doesn't want to, I will always be ready. How do you like this proposal?" I looked at her carefully. "You are the best I ever had. But the idea of us just sharing a bed without any commitment doesn't sit well with me. I can't bear the thought that even if you're not with another man, I'll still be thinking about it. We both deserve a normal relationship that is worth respecting." She came closer, ran her hand over my face, and kissed me. "You don't understand. I'm already in a relationship. You can date whoever you want, but know that I will always be there for whatever you want. I don't want anyone else. I love you, and I'm going to stay true to this feeling." She kissed me again and left. Her father re-entered the room after she left. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked. I was still looking at the door. "I don't know, Dad. What do you recommend?" "You need to come to terms with the fact that her brother slept with your ex-wife and understand that she's probably not going to disappear from your life or leave and start over from scratch." Then the father added, "By the way, your mother and I have been wanting to give you something for a long time." "What is this?" "We were toying with the idea of giving you a house on wheels. I think now is the time." I realized that it was useless to argue with them, and I liked the idea. It took a week, but I soon found the perfect mobile home. I thanked my parents and bought a new trailer to attach to it. I equipped it so that I could work on the road if necessary. It was a great decision. Now I was making armor, and my father was making shields, swords, and axes, and we were both happy. When Teddy saw my new van, he enviously asked, "Has it been blessed yet?" "What do you mean?" I didn't understand. "Sex? Was there sex in it?" "No," I replied. He chuckled. "Do you mind if Diana and I do it first?" I laughed. "Of course, use it." He immediately texted her, and 10 minutes later, she was already here. They held hands and went into the van. When they returned, they were both smiling and holding hands. "We want you to be the first to know," Teddy said. "Diana and I are going to get married." Diana hugged me. "Your van finally convinced him," she said with a smile. "Thank you." I barely saw them all weekend, but there was a slight scent of perfume lingering in my RV. A few weeks passed, and one evening Hannah saw my new van. It was quiet, and I knew I could have sex with her again if I wanted. She looked at him and was impressed. "It's much more than a tent," she said. "Yes, that's right." "Isn't this a queen-size bed?" she asked. "Yes, and a huge closet." "Exactly. Looks like 2 people could fit in the shower." "Maybe." We were standing in the living room of the van, and she came up to me. "Has it already been consecrated?" she asked playfully. "No, it's brand new," I lied, knowing that Teddy and Diana had already done so. "Well," she almost whispered, approaching me, "we can do it now or this weekend." We were in my parents' front yard, so now was not an option. "What do you mean, weekend?" I asked. "After the festival, we will have plenty of time in the evening. We can do it then. I leave on Tuesday morning at 5. "I won't wait for you," I replied, hoping that would stop her. She smiled as if she was confident in herself. "You shouldn't. I'll be here until midnight on Monday." She turned out to be right. When I got into the van on Tuesday morning, Hannah was already inside. She brought her things, stocked the kitchen with food, and was even lying in bed when I set off. A few minutes into the ride, she came out to the front, wearing only a robe that kept falling open when I looked at her. She met Diana when we got to the festival. Both wore dresses with plunging necklines that accentuated their figures. All day I just thought about how to finish my work quickly. At the end of the day, Teddy and I closed our stall and headed to the van, where Hannah and Diana were already preparing dinner. I had never tried Hannah's food, but to my surprise, it was very tasty. After Teddy and Diana left, Hannah asked, "Do you want to take a shower with me?" It turned out that 2 people actually fit in the shower, and after that we headed to the bed. We continued to have sex all night. It started 3 years ago. Her family was initially opposed to our relationship. They tried to convince Hannah that the only reason I was allowing her to travel with me was to get revenge on her brother for sleeping with my wife. Her brother lied to them, telling them his version of how his divorce happened. None of them had been to the trial to hear the truth, so they, like Hannah, believed him. Hannah obtained copies of my divorce court papers and her ex-daughter-in-law's divorce proceedings. Sometime later, her brother left the city and moved to the other side of the country after his life became difficult. He continued to destroy other people's marriages until he ended up with one husband who explained to him that he shouldn't do this. Since then, Hannah has been wearing new dresses to festivals that hide her rounded belly. She hasn't said yet that she wants to get married before she becomes a mother, but I know it's on her mind. And so do I. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.